Hello, I'm Dr. Tom, and I'd like to welcome you to another Friday update. And I would love to begin today by sharing with you the fact that we have another PatentNode power-up being released this week. So again, if you will go to the website, go onto the Member Development tab on the website, you can scroll down and see where Sifu Stefan will be able to share another power-up message with you. And it is so enlightening and encouraging, and we're so fortunate to have Sifu Stefan in this club because he has a process. You see, martial arts are based on processes, and there are certain things that you do to set a process, and there are ways in which you celebrate the win. There are ways in which you introduce yourself, the ways in which you excuse yourself. There are rules, if you will. There are ethics, there are processes, there are ways in which you share your message and ways in which you incorporate your message into your very being. And it is that kind of messaging that I want to discuss with you this week, because this has been a very spectacular week in the United States as far as the political arena goes, and with the election that's happening, and probably as you watch this, still going on. And you may wonder, well, why are you in a red, white, and blue tie today? And I am in that tie for a very reason, because I actually received this tie when I was doing a talk at a party for the Kentucky Derby, and we had as a guest who was performing for us was Lee Greenwood, and he was singing "God Bless the USA," and never has there been a time where it's more important that we could use some universal guidance and actually some centering, if you will. I discussed this on my Wellness Wednesday this week, and I was talking about the two extremes that people have, and it reminded me of a chapter that came from the Untethered Soul, a chapter that I read there when we were studying, and I have a copy, for those of you who have not seen that, it's a book by Michael Singer, and the purpose of today's lesson is to talk about a particular chapter in that book that I was reminded of as I was doing this Wednesday Wellness, talking about how I'd been to a political watch party with my friend, dear friend, Steve Womack, who is the United States representative from this part of the state of Arkansas. And so he'd invited me to come out, and we were sharing some laughs and reminiscing, having some good times, and I noticed in that event how there was so much pressure from people, and they were so taken emotionally to one side of the equation versus the other side, and it was interesting to watch how people were so emotionally charged. And so it reminded me to go back and review that particular chapter, The Secret of the Middle Way. It's toward the end of this book, and as you study in the Success Mastery course, and as you get to level 7, you'll understand more about how we reference this book in our training in the Success Mastery course. And part of that reference in that chapter, he talked about the Tao. It's T-A-O, but it's pronounced the Tao, and it's a philosophy. It's something that's nothing, and that's kind of difficult to describe until you understand it. And basically, we're talking about a pendulum of extremes. If something swings to the right in the universe, it has the same amount of force that will swing it back to the left. And that is the analogy that I was attempting to address in my talking about the political environment that's happening here. Because, and I typically don't get into politics, and I'm not going to get into politics except to say that it is in this country so divided that there is a right and a left. There is a yin and a yang. There is the differences of the planet in lightness and darkness, and expansion and contraction. Everything has a center and comes back to center. And so will this. And so regardless of which side you're on and who you support or don't support, or if it's over by now, which I doubt that will be, because I think there are going to be a number of challenges that will happen in this particular environment. And the point is to not get too wrapped up in whichever side you're on, because there are just as many people that feel a different way. Now, what that means is that at some point this will come to a center where there is a medium, a happy medium, if you will, where people can exist. And I'd like for you to extrapolate that into your life, because everything in life is exactly like this. You can say, is it good to eat? And yes, it is. Is it good to eat all the time? No, it's not. So is it good or is it bad? You see, it's not good or bad, it just is. There is a certain amount of food that you must consume to maintain your life. And if you consume more than that, you'll gain weight. If you consume less than that, you'll lose weight, all the way up until you could get to starvation, or all the way that you could get to gluttony and obesity. So the answer is never quite as simple unless you make it simple. And my point is, let's just make it simple. Let's figure out what works for you. Because what works for you politically also has to work for you in the way that you eat, in the way that you think about other things, in the way you utilize those concepts in your relationships, in the way you utilize those concepts in your business, because this is everything. This is the universe. This is the way that it works. Always. And life will always come back to center. Regardless, if you see so many people in this arena right now are so obsessed with this, it's hours and hours and hours and hours a day that they'll spend in front of the TV when very little new information is actually released. And here's the facts. Eventually, we'll have a president. And that president will serve for, well, maybe 4 years. And then that president, if he is able to be reelected, will serve another 4 years. And if he's not, we'll have a new president. And so if you look at this from a 50-year plan or a 100-year plan, 4 years doesn't matter quite so much. 4 years doesn't matter quite so much. So no matter what happens, it's not going to be all good and great and grand for one side and horrific for the other, nor will it be great and grand for that side and horrific for the other. Somewhere in between is how you will exist over the next 4 years. Now, I know many of you members are not in the United States, but the lesson applies everywhere. Whether you are in a democracy where you have the ability to elect people and you have to trust in the process of the election and how all that goes, and we're testing that in certain ways in this country for the very first time. After over 200 years, we still have new glitches because things change. Technology changes. The way in which things can be carried out are different. And so each of those differences need to be filtered out and figured out so that everyone, most everyone, can agree on a path forward. That is the point. There is a path forward because the universe is moving forward. Always. Even when the pendulum is in the center and it appears to be static, there is still movement. There's just an equal amount of force pulling the pendulum in each direction. Therefore, it appears to not be moving, yet it is. You appear to be sitting still, yet you're spinning in space. You see, the eyes can deceive you. The ears can deceive you. The point is to find your balance. The point is to find your center. The point is for you to not spend your time in either extreme, because being in the extreme takes a tremendous amount of energy. And the more energy you spend, the less you have. So when you begin to spend less energy there in either extreme, not calling them right or wrong, we'll just call them the extremes, the less time you spend there, the less energy you spend there, therefore the more energy you can have to build you. So the less you spend there, the more you have here. The less you spend there, the less upset you get, the more emotionally, the less emotionally charged you get, the more stability, the more serenity, the more peace you have in the center. Because life happens in the center. And this happens so often. And you hear about this in all kinds of fields. And as an example of how this isn't a political conversation, this is a life conversation. Because this applies, as you know, I'm a big fan of sports. And invariably, regardless of the sport, athletes of that sport will tell you, the supreme athletes, the leading athletes, the greatest of all time athletes in their individual sport, to a person, will explain their sport to you in terms of, I got to a point where the game slowed down. It doesn't matter if it's basketball and they said they could see the path. They could see the pass before it was ready for it to happen. They anticipated. They didn't have time to think about it. It wasn't consciously. You see, it was subconscious. The way in which they could make a move, or the way that they could play a defender, or they'll say, I could hear the other person think. I knew what their move was going to be. It doesn't matter if it's a golfer and he says, on this particular Sunday when I won the Masters, the cup looked this big around instead of its normal size. Basketball players will tell you that the rim became this big around instead of its normal size. Well, I can assure you, the rim was the same size. The cup was the same size. It just appeared differently because they were able, they were able to slow the game down. This is what I'm asking you to do, to be the greatest of your life. To be the greatest in your life by slowing your life down. And you do that by not getting involved in the extremes. You do that by spending less time in the extremes. And when you find yourself, you see, this is a process. You don't just one day say, I'm never going to get extremely emotional again. What you do is to say, when I find myself moving toward an extreme emotion, I recognize it, and I begin to move back to center. Listen to what I'm sharing with you. When I feel myself moving, when I feel my pulse rate go up, when I feel my blood pressure rising, when I feel like I'm in an argumentative conversation, slow the game down. Slow the conversation down. Lower your shoulders. Begin a breathing exercise. Slow it down. When you can move out of that conversation, maybe in the beginning you need to go meditate on something. Maybe you need to do some tapping on something. Maybe you need to wear a card or look at things visually in the I Ching system. Maybe you need to do a mortar march. Maybe you need to get a best adjustment. Whatever it is, however it is that you center yourself, maybe you need to do some martial arts. Maybe you need to go do some Tai Chi. Center yourself, slow it down. And once you recognize how to do that, you create a pattern, you create a habit, you create a vehicle, you create a process, you create a procedure in which you can begin to take control of your life and slow it down. This is the purpose and the lesson for today. It matters not if you're talking about relationships. It matters not if you're talking about your diet. It matters not about whether you're eating the right kinds of foods or taking the right kinds of supplements. It matters not if you say, I like hot weather or cold weather. If it gets too hot, it's an extreme. You can't live, you can't survive. If it gets too cold, you can't live, you freeze. You see, there's always an extreme in whatever category you choose to focus on, or you choose to think about, or you choose to be in. Being you. Understanding your energy field and your energy flow, and the way you have more energy is to spend less of it in the extremes. It takes less energy to be centered. When you are centered, you actually begin to receive a mental clarity. You begin to receive a download. You begin to remember that there was a book and a chapter. You might not recall the name of the chapter, but you remember there was something in there toward the end, and then it comes back to you. See, you don't have to have a photographic memory. You don't have to remember everything about everything. This energy works for you whether you understand it or believe in it or not, because it's a universal law. You just have to know where to go to look. You just have to know that somewhere in the Success Mastery course, this topic was discussed. You just have to know what the concept was, and now you can Google it. Now, when I talk about Lee Greenwood and when he gave me this tie, you don't have to remember everything about that. You can Google Lee Greenwood, and the song will pop up. You can watch it on YouTube, and it's very moving. It will build pride, and it will instill hope. Where when you listen to enough of the talking heads and the news media, you begin to wonder if there is hope. And I'm here to tell you there is hope. We will survive this, and we will be stronger for it. and we will figure out a better way for the next time. There are always opposing forces in the universe. Always, regardless of the topic that you pick and the topic that you choose. You see, when you learn to recognize that clarity that I'm talking about, when you can get in that space where it's literally a downloading of information. This happens, and you'll see it with great speakers on stage. When they're talking, they just start and they go into it's like they go on autopilot. They're not thinking consciously because it happens too quickly. They're not reading notes and going item by item. It's a download that happens. And oftentimes afterwards, they can't remember the order and they hope they got their points across. They just are picking up on an energy and a flow and a feel, a centering, if you will, that's coming from feedback in the audience. And it is that sharing of information that allows people to store this in their brain and in their body and in their field, which allows them to take that, whether they're physically taking notes or they can just recall from memory the feeling they had in the event at the time when they were listening to a presentation, and all of a sudden that peace and that calmness comes over them. This is the way it works, and this is why it's so powerful to be at events, and this is why it's so powerful to be at major events. And it's so powerful to be in the presence of your Gen brothers and sisters who are vibrating on a frequency that will allow each of us to grow, because we are, in fact, the collective consciousness. And that is a global collective consciousness. It's why the company is called the Global Information Network. By globally sharing that information and networking with each other, we raise the consciousness of the planet. And we make changes in the planet. And we make them so that people can realize their potential. That's really what it is. Each of us are on a journey, and hopefully we recognize the journey, and hopefully we have figured out our purpose, and we know our potential, and we're moving in that direction because you're always moving. The key is to trust in the process and to celebrate those wins. And by celebrating a win, it doesn't mean you have to throw a party. Yes, sometimes we talk about toasting with champagne. Rarely is it inappropriate to toast with champagne. However, it's not always necessary to consider it a win if you don't have the champagne. Sometimes it's a fist pump. Sometimes it's just a feeling. Sometimes it's just an acknowledgement. Sometimes it's kind of a wink. Sometimes it's just looking in the mirror and saying, yes, that's a win. We're doing it. This is what global information is about. This is what studying in the Success Mastery course is about. This is why reviewing information in a new unit of time is about. It's about trusting in the process and celebrate the wins, however you celebrate the wins. And I look forward to celebrating many wins with you in the future. I'm Dr. Tom. I hope you have a spectacular week.